Well, we finally did it. We've now talked about every chromatic dragon that didn't make the cut for D&D 5th edition, and we've talked about every Ferrous dragon that didn't make it to 5e either, which is all of them. But now they've all got shiny, brand new 5th edition stats, and we've uncovered their history, thus bringing them to a new generation of D&D nerds. Well, all of them except for one. Today we're going to be talking about the final entry in the Ferrous dragon family tree, the oft overlooked nickel dragons. These guys are unique in a few different ways, but most notably, they are the smallest true dragon species, period. And while that may seem like a weakness, these devious little creatures have managed to turn that expectation into their greatest strength. So buckle up, because today we're going to put the final pin in the Ferrous dragon saga. Ferrous dragons are the weird cousins of the metallic dragons who dropped all the goody two-shoes nonsense and replaced it with an ironclad code of law. Any of you who watch my content regularly know exactly what I'm about to say, but if you haven't already seen my video about iron dragons, I talk about all the lore and backstory about what a Ferrous dragon even is, so if you're interested in that, which provides some important context for this video, you should go watch that one first. But the one thing that is most important to know with this dragon in particular is that all Ferrous dragons are lawful, except for nickel dragons. Kind of. As the story goes, in the Age of Dragons, long before the humanoid races started gunking up the place, Ferrous dragons were among the most powerful in the world. But of course, they had a civil war about it and essentially wiped themselves out almost entirely. In fact, we only know the identity of 5 Ferrous dragon species, and there were 7 others, 2 of which were driven to extinction and the other 5 are MIA. We've literally got no information about them other than the fact that according to the original Dragon magazine article about Ferrous dragons, what happened to these dragons is unknown, but whenever the other Ferrous dragons are questioned about them, the dragons are strangely silent. They say that history is written by the victors, and I guess in this case they just chose not to take any notes. Although if I'm being completely real, this ominous paragraph is giving big time the Geneva Convention wasn't written yet energy, so do with that what you will. Just something to think about. In any case, Ferrous dragons may have truly self-destructed as an entire species, were it not for the nickel dragons. Both sides were in a deadlock, with neither faction gaining significant ground. At least that was true, until the nickel dragons switched sides and joined with the iron, chromium, cobalt, and tungsten dragons as the 5th member of their crew. Seeing as they were part of the enemy faction though, they were not lawful, necessarily. In fact, in Dragon Magazine 170, where the Ferrous dragons first appeared, nickel dragons are chaotic neutral. However, fast forward 16 years, and in Dragon Magazine 356, the second and last time we'd ever see Ferrous dragons in an official product, they're now lawful evil. This could simply be chalked up to the designers wanting all Ferrous dragons to just be lawful and have that design choice very clear cut and not as muddy. But personally, I like to think after they switched sides, the chaotic nickel dragons were forced to adapt to the new allies they had found and gradually became lawful beings over time. Though if that's true, the other half of their alignment shifting from neutral to evil is really interesting, because following that same logic, it would seem to imply that the other Ferrous dragons also influenced the nickel dragons to become more villainous, which, like, yeah, that's very possible. And it also implies that the surviving Ferrous dragons weren't necessarily the good guys in that big old civil war they were fighting. Just another thing to think about. Now, alignment shenanigans aside, the things that truly makes nickel dragons unique, at least at a glance, is their small stature. These dragons are always one size category smaller than other true dragons of the same age, meaning that they are small when they're born and only ever become huge at the ancient category, never any larger. And this has led to nickel dragons coming down with a bad case of small dog syndrome. They are hyper aggressive and almost always the first to strike in combat. However, they've also learned to use their small size as an advantage. Because they are so much smaller than the dragons most other creatures are used to seeing, potential enemies enemies often think they're a lot younger than they are. If you see a dragon the size of a large dog, every scrap of lore out there tells you that this is indeed probably a wormling, but a medium-sized nickel dragon would actually be a young dragon, to use the in-game terminology. And while compared to other young dragons, they may not be quite as powerful as your average candidate, compared to a wormling of literally any other type, that is a lethal mistake to make. Using the fact that they are often underestimated as a way to catch their enemies off guard, combined with a fighting style that favors quick and unpredictable movements, has made these creatures a unique threat that goes far beyond mere damage potential. So basically, they're just cute little guys, and they may or may not use that fact to their absolute benefit. But speaking of cute little guys, I just gotta take a moment to share with you this week's sponsor, 1985 Games and their milk carton dice. Inspired by other cute core brands like Hello Kitty, Pusheen, and Animal Crossing, these aesthetically adorable dice sets are currently on Kickstarter, and I love them. Each one of these themed milk cartons includes an enamel pin, a sticker, and of course, a full set of polyhedral dice. Now I know a bunch of you just heard the word dice and were immediately in, but let me explain, because there's more. Each set has their own fruit-themed cat character, and they all have little backstories, and of course, the dice in their milk carton are all designed to match. There are 12 different sets to choose from, and personally, I'm partial to Wendy Watermelon. She's a big-time hot spring and nap enthusiast, which I can just relate to that in a major way. Also, look at her. Look how cute! And if you can't choose just one, they have discounts available the more sets you bundle, so you can grab all 12 if you want. There are no laws that say you can't. So if you want to get your hands on these adorable little dice sets, you can do so right now by using my link in the description down below to go check out the Kickstarter and see for yourself. Thank you so much to 1985 Games for sponsoring this episode of Monster of the Week about the most adorable little dragon. Speaking of which, let's take a minute and talk about where nickel dragons actually live. Nickel dragons occupy almost exclusively swamps and marshes, preferably on the coast if possible. Being both amphibious and immune to acid, they especially enjoy carving out cavernous lairs in places that are only accessible through underground tunnels filled with acidic bog water. And while they will use these locations as a place to secure their hoard and lay eggs, nickel dragons don't actually hang out within their lair very much at all. Instead, they prefer to just make their bed anywhere they feel like that night. They're always still within their own territory, but they like to just pass out somewhere else that is comfortable and nearby the lair, which makes them very difficult to track down. This choice of landscape often puts them at odds with black dragons, who tend to prefer these locales as well. However, they rarely get into fights over territory because unless there's an obvious gap in power favoring the nickel dragon, they're gonna favor running away to fighting. But that doesn't mean they'll just abandon the swamp, they'll simply do their best to stay hidden from the black dragon if they know it draws near. But if they do end up in a confrontation, these battles tend to be extremely violent and bloody. Nickel dragons breathe a corrosive gas that, much like the black dragon's acid breath, deals acid damage. And since both dragons are immune to acid, the only way they can actually harm each other is with tooth and nail. But I guess we can talk about how this dragon actually fights when we talk about game mechanics, which is what we're gonna do right now. I had so much fun updating the stat block for these guys. Nickel dragons are extremely fast and aggressive when compared with other dragons, so I gave them a few abilities to match. For starters, they have the aggressive advance and rampage bonus actions, both borrowed from orcs and gnolls respectively. And these two abilities give nickel dragons lots of mobility, and I think really emphasize how quick in combat they can be. I also gave the dragon a surprise attack trait that allows them to deal a few extra d6s worth of damage to any creature they hit with an attack during the first round of combat, so long as they're surprised, really emphasizing that strike first attitude.
Strike first, strike hard, no mercy, sir.
They've also got flyby attack, so if the dragon ever flies out of an enemy's reach, which is something they should be doing literally all the time, they do not provoke an attack of opportunity. In terms of reactions, the dragon has Rend Retaliation and Backlash, which trigger when the dragon is hit by a specific attack type and allow the dragon to clap back, which is fun. However, the reaction I think is the most fun on this dragon's stat sheet is Misdirect, which is a Dungeon Dad original and something I think adds a lot to this creature, at least from a flavor mechanics blending sort of perspective. This ability triggers when the dragon is targeted by an attack roll. The dragon can attempt to misdirect the target, imposing disadvantage on that attack roll. If the target misses, the misdirection has worked and the dragon is able to move half its speed away from the target. However, if the attack still hits despite having disadvantage, the misdirection has failed and the dragon does not get to move half its speed away from the target, but it is enraged. meaning on the dragon's next turn, it has advantage on the first attack it makes against the creature who just hit it. In terms of this creature's actual actions, it's got the Rend attack, Acid Breath, and of course, a few spells. Straight out the egg, it has Absorb Elements, Grease, Fog Cloud, Entangle, and Stinking Cloud, gaining gaseous form when it becomes young and Confusion as an adult. A very potent list of spells that, if used optimally, is going to make actually killing one of these things a logistical nightmare. But we're not here to discuss logistics. We're here to talk about cool D&D monsters and how we might actually use them in a campaign. So let's move on and talk about that thing I just said. So without getting super involved with the dragon's lore and backstory, these guys can make for a really fun subversion of a typical dragon hunt type adventure. Maybe the party is sent to deal with a dragon that's been terrorizing a nearby town. Based on the description of the creature, the locals seem to think it's a young gray, black, white, or possibly even silver dragon. However, they are terribly mistaken because the dragon in question is actually an adult nickel dragon who's been mistaken for one of these other dragon types due to their size. This could lead to a really fun investigation, where the players have to piece together lots of eyewitness reports and none of them are really adding up. Or it could result in abject horror if they just decide to jump in headfirst and realize the error of their ways mid-combat. And that's just one specific scenario. I think using this dragon to subvert the expectations people have of dragons and their lore is a really clever way to use this monster. I also find it so funny that within the Ferrous Order itself, we have iron dragons with the opposite thing going on at the top because they're so large that they're always one size category bigger than dragons of their age. So these two creatures at the same age, side by side, would be out here looking like Shaq and his girlfriend. That's not really a plot hook, but it is funny. I also feel like a young dragon would very likely try to pass itself off as just a little baby.
I'm just a baby.
In order to avoid any real consequences should it find itself in a bad situation. I do think they also have potential to serve as key members of the Ferrous Order if you want to do something that involves other Ferrous dragons, but as low-ranking members of their society, it's likely that they would serve as messengers for higher-ranking dragons who may have a missive to send or something like that. And that's honestly great because it allows them to serve as a point of entry for the players if they're trying to get involved with a Ferrous dragon plot. It's unlikely they'd be able to find an audience with an ancient iron dragon, but with a nickel dragon to do the introductions, it could be possible. Nickel dragons also have this air of treachery attached to them ever since they betrayed their own kind for the Ferrous Order. I mean, they're technically allies, but they've shown themselves to be untrustworthy in the past, and that reputation has kind of followed them even now. So I could see some political intrigue happening where the nickel dragons are suspected of a plot by some of the other Ferrous dragons, and maybe they are indeed plotting something. Perhaps they're even scheming to elevate themselves within the order by a spot or two. But it's also possible that they're just innocent little guys and they're being scapegoated by one of the other dragons in some kind of attempted power grab. But in either case, political intrigue is neat, dragons are neat, and draconic political intrigue is also neat. But however you choose to use these dragons, as always, linked in the description down below is a Google document which contains the 5th edition stats for this monster, which contains everything you will need to successfully run it at your game table. And of course, if you are one of my lovely patrons over on the Dungeon Dad Patreon page, you can find the high-res PDF stat block. All the same information, but with some cool new art, fancy schmancy layout, and it helps me continue to do what I do here. Seriously could not do this without you guys. And it's only $3 a month. It's a couple dollars, and I get to make a video. I don't know why I almost turned into Mickey Mouse there for a second. That was weird. But speaking of patrons, it is time for Patron of the Week. And this week, our randomly selected patron is Dinosaur Nightlight. Thank you so much for the prehistoric amount of support you send my way. I truly appreciate it. You're a light in the dark, my friend. And thank you for watching. As always, if there's a monster from an older edition of D&D, Pathfinder, Numenera, Worlds Without Number, Morkborg, I don't know, other RPGs. If there's a monster from a game, just any game that you want to see brought into 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons, and you want to see me do a deep dive into their lore and get all obsessive nerd about it, let me know in the comments down below or in the Dungeon Dad Discord server on the Monster Suggestions channel. And either way, it will be added to the master list of suggestions for monsters to cover on this channel, and you may just see it show up on a future episode of Monster of the Week. And if you don't have a suggestion, just leave a like and a comment anyway. Just say, I don't know, tell me what your favorite type of pastry is, because all that stuff helps me. So even if you don't have a few extra bucks to throw my way on Patreon, just liking, commenting, and letting me know what's going on with you is the best way to support this channel, because it tells our algorithmic overlords that I'm not a trash person, actually. Whether that's true or not doesn't matter. They don't need to know that. But in any case, thank you so much for watching. I truly do appreciate it. And I will see you in the next video. Until then.